capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue. It was in Megatrends that Austin's boom was so widely publicized. This best-selling book of the early 1980s portrayed us in glowing terms as a city of the future. But the boom gave way to bust by the mid-1980s, and the impact on the religious community has been profound. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. And today we turn to a story which has not been featured in the midst of the city's recent economic turmoil, but which deserves special attention, namely the effect of Austin's recession on the religious community. When the bloom went off the economic boom, the overall effect was visible. Perhaps the most conspicuous result were the number of empty buildings downtown. Austin carries the dubious distinction of having the highest percentage of vacant office space in the nation. But the collapse of oil prices and of the real estate market had a domino effect which reached far beyond the unemployment lines or the number of bankruptcies. It was also reaching out into the vicinity's houses of worship. The guests who will help us probe this issue include Neil Spelce, well-known Austin business analyst and consultant, and Chris Sanders, president of the Austin chapter of Church Business Administrators, and Karen Vinoy, associate pastor of University Methodist Church. And we welcome you all.
Glad to be here.
And would like to start out, Neil, as one who has done a good bit of analyzing of Austin's economy to see if you feel that the description that you just heard is accurate.
Well, I do think it is accurate, Richard, and I think it's accurate from several standpoints, broadly, but all really kind of draw down individually, because over the last couple of years here in Austin, we've seen a tremendous number of people lose jobs, a tremendous number of people having their income either gone completely or cut away. And we've seen people in homes here in Austin who had value in their homes to the extent that they went out and got loans on those homes, and then the value of those homes diminished beyond what the loans happened to be held by the banks or savings institutions against those houses. And as a result, people have lost their homes because they couldn't make the payments and because the value was not there as collateral against the loans themselves. So we've had a good deal of hurt over the last couple of years here because of the economic downturn in many areas. Not widespread clear across the board. There have been certain areas here in Austin that have been good.
It's been uneven.
But it has been very uneven.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But I think it's been even enough to affect some people. Just, I think, for instance, if persons haven't lost jobs, they've nevertheless perhaps have been hurting otherwise.
Oh, they've been hurting in a lot of other ways. I'd venture to say there's probably not a single person in Austin today who hasn't either felt personally or knows someone, a neighbor or a close friend or a relative, who hasn't been impacted in some way by the economic downturn. There's less money right now going through the Austin economy by millions of dollars than there had been in the recent past. So that means it goes all the way to the mom and pop stores, the large department stores. People are not spending as much money because they don't have as much money, and as a result of that, there's less economic benefit flowing through the entire community.
All right. Well, I think in terms of people knowing either firsthand or friends or neighbors who have been impacted by this, we're not telling people anything particularly new at this point in time. Right. What may be, however, new from the standpoint of some of our viewers is how it's getting into the churches. And Chris, has just a dollars and cents standpoint, how do you see that as having an impact within the religious community?
Well, there's clear evidence that the economic downturn and the loss of jobs, the loss of income, and the slower economic situation has resulted in fewer offerings and fewer tithes coming into our local churches. It's kind of an obvious type of assessment, but it is true. And while some churches maybe haven't felt that as hard as others, and the folks that I share with and talk with, there's no question that the impact has been felt.
Now, who are these folks?
Folks from all denominations. As you introduced, I am a part of a church business Administrators Association that has all denominations and involved in it. And in visiting with those friends and acquaintances through that group, I hear the same story.
Mm-hmm.
Less offerings, or they've had to. The line has leveled out. There's been no growth. Maybe there's taken more members to keep that level amount of offerings in place. It's just been, everyone seems to have felt it to some degree.
All right. Well, I think we'll have occasion to come back and try to pick up on some of the subtleties of that, because sometimes it's obvious what the impact is, and sometimes it's hidden. And I think Karen, as a pastor who's dealing with people on a counseling basis, mm-hmm. and in a one-to-one kind of relationship, can you see some of the hidden effects?
And when I think about the effect of the economy on Austin's churches, I think about people, about faces. I see faces.
All right.
I see people who've left the congregations I've been in because they couldn't find work locally, and they moved to other parts of the country in order to find work. I see people who've come into my office who suddenly went from a very happy, stable marital situation to a very stressful, unhappy situation. A lot of different reasons for that. A lot of changes in employment, where a person was in one career, say real estate, and found themselves unable to support their family in that career, and they retooling, or maybe going back to something they had left, or trying to develop new skills, going back to school. At University Methodist, of course, we get a lot of people who going back to school in order to learn a new way to make a living, and all of that involves a lot of stress on families.
Yes. I sometimes wonder if, in the light of the recent history of Austin, shouldn't it change its name to Stress, Texas? I mean, people are really stressed out in a lot of ways, and it seems to me that, and I was thinking, as we were looking at it from a pastoral standpoint, in counseling with couples that come to me for preparation for weddings and so on, I have to share with them that the studies have shown that when it comes to difficulties in marriage, the key problem is it's not kids, it's not sex, it's not in-laws, it's money.
It's often money.
And that the extent to which that has been shown to be the bone of contention, probably more than any other factor, and you put that into a kind of mix that we've got here in this town, then it seems to follow.
And I think it's because money is an expression of values. So many of our values and expectations and identity is rolled up in how much money we make and what we think that's about, and our notion of what it means to be successful in life.
Well, and you know, it's not just so much the money that we have or we don't have, it's the economic news. If you pick up the newspaper every day through these past couple of years and you read, hey, times are tough, all of a sudden you may not personally be feeling it at that moment because you've got a reasonably good job with the state, and maybe your spouse has a reasonably good job with the city, and it's not necessarily threatened, but you see that out there and you think, wow, there may be a problem here that's going to impact me, and the stress even is on those who are not necessarily impacted directly by it, just because of what's going on around them.
It creates also kind of a climate, a negative climate. The news, I mean, Sematech came as such a welcome relief in the midst of all of the bad news.
Well, it came at a perfect time. When it hit at the beginning of 1988 in January, it hit at a time when Austin was probably getting to the very, very bottom of its economic problems at that point. The downturn had started, and in January of '88 we were still in the middle of a trough there, heading down even a little bit more. But it was a harbinger, I think, of things to come, and I think it helped because it was a wonderful economic impact for Austin, both immediately and for the long-term future as well. And I think that was a signal that really worked well for the psychological impact here.
Well, you've been quoted, Neil, as being somewhat of an optimist as far as having a turnaround having occurred in sometime in 1988.
Yes. The turnaround, if you look back, and boy, hindsight is really good when you can look way back. So when you look just a short distance back, it's probably not as effective. But a short distance back, it looks as if, in looking at a number of numbers, that the middle of the summer in 1988, August, July, somewhere in there, The bottom occurred in Austin overall, and then the upswing started. And it's shown itself, manifested itself in a number of ways. There are more jobs now than there were, and we've had more jobs being increased in the community every month since July and August. More people getting jobs as a result of that occurrence happening. Another thing, real estate is a tremendous problem, as everyone knows here, but an important thing has occurred in real estate, which again, I think is another little bit of a harbinger of things to come. Our apartments now are at 90% occupancy in Austin. Now, when you talk about that, that's the first step in an economic domino, because when apartments get full, rates go up. You don't see the signs that you've seen in the past now that says free rent hanging over all the apartment buildings in Austin. Okay, what's happening now? Now, it's not so good for those in the apartment at this stage, but bear with me just a second for what it means long term. 90% occupancy, rates start to go up, then it gets to a point where those couples that are in apartments now start thinking maybe it's time to invest in a home and get a starter home. So they move out. It's the natural economic cycle. They move out of apartments and start creating a demand for the starter home, the first home. And then that creates a demand for that house that the couple has been in maybe for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and now they've had 1, 2, or 3 kids, and that home is getting a little small for them, and so they start looking to upgrade, and pretty soon it just 1, 2, 3 starts to follow.
So those are the kinds of measurements that you
that are occurring now that are heading us in that direction.
All right. Well, I think that we'll just assume for a moment that turnaround in those respects are at work. But there's a delayed reaction, I presume, from the fact that earlier on, for instance, Chris, you didn't talk about people necessarily getting optimistic all of a sudden. Have you heard any turnaround in terms of the attitude?
I don't believe so. I believe you're right. It's going to be slow, and it's going to be very methodical. The people that I have visited with about it feel like it's going to be very slow in the turnaround. And visiting with Neil for the show, the Austin's growth rate, the net increase is not increasing. It's staying the same.
In other words, we had people leaving Austin. We had a loss in jobs, and you're right, a loss in population, and a net out-migration occurred here over that period of time. And so now that's stemmed, and it's heading in the other way. But I agree with you. I think it's going to be slow in coming back.
And
it's not
churches are conservative institutions anyway, so that once people have been burned, they are much less likely to step back out there with whatever they really can do financially, because there's a feeling I have to be very careful with where I am right now.
I heard a statistic today that I'll share that for the last 7 months, progressively in Texas, the number of food stamp recipients has continued to increase to record levels. So while there's some good signs, there's still the hurting, there's still the need on the part of so many people. And I think that's a revealing statistic.
Well, one of the things that this brings to mind is the response of the churches in a condition like this in terms of its own self-preservation, of having enough offerings to come in to maintain its building and its program and its staff and so on, is one dimension. Another is to what extent is it able to reach out to the people who are on food stamps and help provide their part in the social net to keep people from falling through. And do you find any evidence that suddenly, at the very same time that the churches are hurting, they're more caring in regard to reaching out to people in need?
I don't know about more caring. Certainly in the congregations I've served have been full of really loving and caring people. But I have seen, for the first time in a congregation I've served in the last 3 years, I've seen church members loaning each other money. Now that may have happened before and I didn't know about it, but I consider that to be unusual. It was a surprise to me. Large sums of money, large to me, large in our world today. And I've also seen them, for example, I could think of 5 or 6 different men in my congregation who, when they were unemployed, came up to the church and did maintenance work on our building, because Chris and I were talking earlier that the building maintenance is the first thing to get cut out of a budget. It's the easiest thing to cut, and it won't talk back to you. And it'll just fall down on you. And
like
so
a choir director.
That's like a choir director. You try to cut the choir director, you're in big trouble. So, but these men coming up here who, you know, could have been out pounding the streets looking for a job, but instead they took some time out of their day to work on a church building, and did that day after day. And I found that.
Let me ask a question in the same regard, because businesses in this community, going through this travail over the past couple of years, have done a number of things, kind of like you're talking about. They've cut employees, they've cut the overhead dramatically, they've cut out the extra frills and all. What about how the way churches are run? How have they reacted to this crisis along those lines?
We've experienced that also. A staff person leaves and we don't fill that position, and cutbacks in budgets and what you spend money for, less money for continuing education and other kinds of travel.
Do churches start stringing people out and paying of the bills, as an example, as some businesses have had to do? Maybe you get 60 days behind instead of 30 days. I would imagine it would all be, I think we're all in this together and probably reacting the same way. Would that be true?
We talked about creative cash flow and creative cash management. Yes, I think the churches, the business administrators, financial secretaries, they're having to find that balance between keeping their bills paid and looking at the past Sunday's receipts, and really having to work hard at keeping the books balanced.
You know, excuse me, Rich, I'm fascinated by how the parallels that seem to occur here. One of the things I've noticed also in the business community is that people begin to work harder, and even though they're making less money, but they work harder. Obviously, staffs do the same. But has the hard work in the congregation impacted attendance at churches? Have we seen, or have people turned the other way and feel like they really need the help that the church can give them?
I think it's interesting you bring that up, because when I was growing up in Abilene, Texas, there was an old saying, I wonder if I'm the only one who's heard this, that only the liquor industry and the church are depression-proof. Anybody else heard that? No. And it's certainly not true financially, but what I think they got started from is when people are hurting in times of stress and crisis, that is definitely an entry point for faith into their lives. And they look for a supportive community.
And I think the extent to which you're conscious of, like the old Chinese character that in their alphabet they have one character that can mean both crisis and opportunity.
Oh, is that right?
Definitely.
And so, you know, I think that obviously applies here. And the extent to which those of us in the religious community can empathize with the hurt and not try to deny the fact that this is painful and it's destructive in all kinds of ways, that there's also the opportunity for setting priorities in a way that wouldn't be happening otherwise. And there's the opportunity to empathize and to reach out. I mean, the one direction to go, it seems to me, is to be so hardened by this and to withdraw and to be protective and defensive. But on the other hand, it can lead into a reaching out and a kind of ministry that may not have been possible otherwise. And this is one thing I wanted to come to, is whether in terms of your involvement, I think, Chris, you're at Tarrytown Baptist Church, and you're not just helping keep the books out there, but you're involved in the ministry otherwise. Have you seen evidence of that?
I think that's true. I think we've seen not only the hurt and the problems, but we've seen people respond. The community of faith respond to this. You see, as Karen pointed out, members helping one another with financial need. I'm very familiar with our Baptist Community Center who distributes food to the needy, and Austin Baptist churches are responding in this case with food drives more than once a year in order to meet that need. Along with the food, there's the street people, the homeless people that has been such on the increase, and a very newsworthy.
And it's not that those are new problems in our
Right.
city. I think that Chris is right. It is that when you don't know if you can pay your mortgage, and when you have to go to the grocery store and be very careful about what you pull off the shelves, I think it makes us more responsive to the folks who don't
Right.
have a mortgage or a place
I think
to
we've
live
been
at all.
sensitized to the need.
It could happen to me.
And just like
Well, yeah.
at the top of the program, that not one of us probably either hasn't been directly affected or knows somebody that has. And I believe I see a lot of response where there's not people, you know, putting others down or judging because of a bad situation. They're reaching out and helping. We have a soup kitchen that provides hot meals to homeless people, street people on the weekends.
And you know, one of the things that I have had some thought about is the extent to which this sort of a condition creates the understanding that you've got Band-Aid approaches to these problems. I mean, they're necessary, and you have to have the immediate help of a soup kitchen or like the work that's done through Caritas, Salvation Army. But at the same time, you think about what has brought about the economic distress, not only in Austin, but in the larger setting of the country. Then there's the priorities of where spending results in a domino effect, that the causes of the economic disorder, the extent to which Austin went crazy with speculative type mentality, and we brought it on ourselves to a certain extent. To another extent, this is a result of policies where there's, I've read figures that there's something like 80% less spending on social issues in the country since 1980. And so that the extent that we are not having that infrastructure and that support system means that I think among the other responses, besides the compassion of I want to help provide food for people directly, is what can I do to help work the systems that help get at the causes and not just the effects. And again, I'm interested whether, you know, within your religious experiences and your churches and so on, that issue is being addressed.
Yes, I think so in ours. And also another thing we talked about earlier before the ethic of more is better, or bigger is better. I see that in question in society and also in churches today in a new way, at a deeper level and with more seriousness than it ever has been questioned.
You see people working their priorities in a way that they may not have before? Thinking
Yes,
those through?
it definitely affects our priorities and our values, but not just automatically saying to do more, to be bigger, to expand is the goal.
Preach to us just a little bit there. I mean,
Okay,
you're
okay,
just
I'll
right on the
stop,
verge of... No, I mean, really, the extent to which... Don't we want to come out of this with the sense that the priority means that you've got a feeling about yourself, your own self-image, that goes beyond what the world says judges you in dollars and cents?
I would hope so. I'm not saying that that happens for everybody. There have been some people who are just devastated by what has happened, and I don't want to shrift their devastation by saying, oh, but look how much deeper you are now, or something like that. But the fact is that as a person of faith, I want to say my self-worth is not determined by how much money I make or my position or whether or not I'm viewed as successful by the world. And if there's anything that could happen to a person in the midst of that, it could be that sort of reevaluation of self.
You, in your work at through the Church Business Administrators Association and so on, you talk about self-worth.
Some, yes.
I mean, it seems like a world apart in a sense, but it would seem to me you would interpret what you're doing in terms of helping with this whole issue of priorities as well as how to make the budget balance.
One example that I thought as Karen was sharing that was as you address the why, maybe of some of the reasons why that we're in the shape we're in, and adjusting priorities, is that I've noticed many churches review the way they approach buildings, for example. Instead of having a building for this and a building for that and a building for this, they'll build a multi-purpose building that will serve several different purposes, which of course has is a better management of money and building resources, and so many. It just filters down so many ways. And I think I've seen some. Well, I know I've seen some instances in like that I think speaks to the reordering of priorities,
right,
and not overextending ourselves, or not going to the notion that
so
more
there's a
is better.
domino, there's kind of a
better.
spiritual and moral domino effect as well as an economic domino effect by this.
I would think it's true, and I would think you probably have seen your congregation members respond on behalf of the church, as you indicated, the unemployed coming in to help. But I would think the deeper thinking on behalf of what we do and what are our real priorities as churches, and what are our real priorities as individuals, probably have really kind of come together well here at this point. And the nice thing about it is that it's now there's light at the end of the tunnel for us here. There really is.
All right, you're making believers out of us here.
Well,
Step right out there.
it is so true, Rich. I honestly believe that we have had a tremendously difficult time. We're going to compare 1987 with the Great Depression when we get several years out, and it's going to be a fairly even comparison. But I also think that right now we're looking this year. This is a year that Austin has come out, and it's a year where the economic trend is back up.
Well, we want to come out of this with that positive note in mind, and we would like also to have this view of the effect of Austin's economic downturn on the community of faith not only analyzed, but we hope that we can commend it to you who are our viewers to continue to think about in light of what we've had contributed by Neil Spells and by Karen Vinoy and by Chris Sanders. Thank you for coming, and thank you for watching. Inviting you to be with us next week, I'm Richard Thompson, issuing you peace be with you at this time. Inshallah.